Thank you very much, sir. So we are poised for the second exciting session of the today, that is ESG investment, building a strong ecosystem. And I would like to invite the President of Indian Business and Professional Group, Mr. Padmanabha Acharya. Sorry, sir. Please come and join us. Uh, May I request you all to have the great round of applause for him. So, Mr. Acharya is the president of Indian Business and Professional Group, Abu Dhabi. He is also an audit partner and leads the audit practice for the Deloitte in the United Arab Emirates. He is also a board member in the Deloitte North-South Europe. He has over 25 years of professional experience across the region, particularly in India, Oman, Qatar, and UAE. His extensive audit and advisory experience draws from the servicing a variety of clients, including national, multinational enterprise in telecommunication, energy, resources, and manufacturing. His energy and resources experience covers upstream and downstream oil and gas, nuclear, and renewable energy sector. He has also led a significant advisory engagement, including capital market offering, internal control over financing reporting, IFRS conversion and prioritization. He is a fellow member of Institute of Chartered Accountant of India, an associate member of Institute of Cost Accountant of India, and member of Colorado Society of Certified Public Accountant, United States. He is a founding member of ICSI Abu Dhabi Chapter Limited. He has also previously served as a chairman of Abu Dhabi chapter of Institute of Chartered Accountant of India. He is an IFRS expert and has spoken at many international forums on variety of the technical topics and has moderated panel discussion at the prominent international seminar. Sir, please join us. So he is going to have a presentation for 10 to 15 minutes. And after that, we'll invite the other panelists of this session. So, sir, over to you.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Yeah. So we have a very interesting panel discussion, and enlightened panelists are already here with us. So I'll start with a couple of things which are not connected with this. My father, Sagri Rama Acharya, who's no longer here, was a company secretary and a cost accountant. And his dream was to see me be a company secretary. Unfortunately, I couldn't complete all of my CS, but I am triple qualified. So to that extent, I hope he's happy, and I'm sure he'd be very proud seeing me at this forum. So thank you, ICSI, for inviting me to speak. So let me start off with a story from Mahabharata, and then we'll link it back to sustainability. So there was a king from Tulunad, and I speak Tulu, who decided to be neutral in the war of Mahabharata. He said, I will neither be with the Pandavas nor with the Kauravas. So what did they give him? You know, people from Udupi, they are very good with cooking. So he undertook that in the 18-day war, he will prepare food for both armies. Every day he used to prepare food for the entire army, and there was no wastage. Absolutely no wastage. So there was a question. After the war of Mahabharata, they went and asked the Tulu king, how did you prepare food with zero wastage? And the king responded, listen, every day I used to go with 50 peanuts and I used to give it to Lord Krishna. Depending upon the number of peanuts he ate, I knew how many people will die on the battlefield the next day. So based on that, I prepared food. The point I want to highlight is, even at the time of Mahabharata, sustainability in terms of food wastage was tracked. So today we know that there's a lot of emphasis on ESG. Why? Why do we have so much of emphasis on ESG? It's because of various things we see around us. We can see the climate, the increase in temperatures. We can see the investors getting very anxious in terms of what the entity is doing. And it's about legacy, isn't it? We are a business today. but we want to work in a sustainable way in which we can produce, we can earn profits, but we can leave something for the next generation, for tomorrow. Stakeholders, regulators, banks, they're all interested in what you are doing as an entity on ESG. You are here trying to tap the capital markets. What do they want from you? Your ESG performance. In the panel discussion, we'll have some very interesting discussions relating to ESG, particularly aspects around finance. We had some interesting discussions on artificial intelligence from Mr. Kabi. Hopefully, we'll have time to even cover AI and sustainability. And amongst other things, we'll also touch on sovereign wealth funds, what they're doing in this part of the world, regulations, governance, the skill sets which are required, and the entire ecosystem. What do we mean by ecosystem? We have several players here, isn't it? You have the entities, you have the institute, you have the members, we have banks, we have stock exchanges, we have other regulators. So the entire ecosystem is something which is necessary to drive sustainability and ESG. So when we speak about ESG, I'm sure this is well covered, but just to recap, the three main elements: environmental element, social element, and governance elements. And of course, I take you back to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. How many Sustainable Development Goals are there? Can someone give me a number? 17, yeah? Which globally, all countries who are members of United Nations agreed, saying, we sign up to this. And there is commitment in terms of all of those nations to achieve those goals. The first goal is eradication of poverty. The 11th goal is on sustainability. The 18th goal is on cooperation and partnership. And there are many other goals looking at even sea life, animal life. There are many things. So I strongly encourage you look at the UN Sustainable Development Goals, because most of the regulations which are coming out, most of the frameworks, most of the standards, the seed is around the SDG. So globally, leaders together have committed to climate actions. Of course, we have forums like COPs. COP28 was in the UAE. So last year in December, I'm sure many of you who are part of this world have gone there to the Expo City and have seen the commitments which our leaders have made, global leaders have made around net zero, around the 1.5% temperature, which we were trying to contain, which we are still trying to contain. Coming to this part of the world, I'll focus on a few elements. And Mr. Lakshmanan asked me to particularly mention local regulations, because some of you are also from India and many of you are from this part of the world. So it's important for us to understand what's happening locally here. Mr. Kabi also covered a few elements. So I'll just start with the GCC stock exchanges. The GCC stock exchanges back in 2003 came up with a document saying listed entities at a minimum must provide this information. GCC, for those people in India, it's a Gulf Cooperation Council. It's a group of countries here, which includes UAE, includes Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Oman. So they're all based here, and together they can make a difference. So they have come up with a common framework around reporting for listed entities. And GRI has been more or less the common basis which they have adopted at this point in time for reporting. So that's something, and I strongly encourage you to look at this unified package. And again, it refers back to GRI, it refers back to some of the SDG goals which we have. And all what we are trying to do is trying to capture certain elements which a company must disclose. For example, when it comes to environment, carbon emissions. When it comes to something like social, they are asking an entity to disclose the compensation of key management. For example, diversity targets. For example, things like your policies and procedures relating to sustainability, any sustainability related information, which an entity produces for it to be disclosed. And when it comes to governance, the composition of audit committees and what action is an entity taking with respect to sustainability related measures. So these are linked back to the GRI standards and they are published. So there's a link here. If ICSI shares this document, you can click on that link and you can get all that information. Back in June 2023, something very interesting happened. This was the International Sustainability Standards Board issuing two standards, S1 and S2. How many of you have heard of S1 and S2? Please raise your hands. Okay, so we have some members who have not heard about this standard. See, one of the key challenges when it comes to sustainability is, I think the previous presenter also has mentioned it, around the diverse, availability of frameworks and standards globally. And why did this happen is because no one stood up and said that I will be the stakeholder, I will develop this for the entire world. When it comes to financial reporting, we know we have the International Accounting Standards Board. That's the common language. Why do we need common standards? Because if we don't have a common standard, like today I'm speaking in English, all of you are able to understand me, you know what exactly I'm saying. But imagine that if we didn't have common standards, where is the transparency? Where is the comparability? Okay, so in Europe, they came up with different regulations. And at this point in time, we have a task force on climate-related disclosures. We call it TCFD. In US, we have the sustainability standards issued by US, which have a lot of guidance industry-wise. We have GRI. So different people are adopting different mechanisms. So the trustees of ISB came up with a need back in 2021 to constitute a different board. They didn't want the ISB to look at it. They said, let's constitute another board called International Sustainability Standards Board. It started its work and its initial product is S1 and S2. S1 is a standard. It's a general purpose standard, general framework standard. And S2 is specifically on climate related disclosures. What is expected in the future is that you will have specific standards for different industries. Okay. Now, are they reinventing the wheel? Are they starting from scratch? No. Luckily, they have taken TCFD as the basis. They are looking at the US standards and they're trying to synchronize everything and trying to issue something which is fit for purpose for all entities. Okay. So that's in a nutshell for you, S1 and S2. I also have a brief slide where I'll give you some more overview of what I'm talking about. COP28. What an exciting time last year. And just out of curiosity, how many of you attended COP28? Please raise your hand. Okay, so about 15% of the audience has attended this. It was amazing. And one thing I was telling my panelist Sharda was that UAE has done something very interesting. If you go to COP28 landing page, it tells you what are the actions which were agreed in COP28 and what were the commitments we made and how are we faring against those commitments. So if you go and look at their website, and I strongly encourage you to look at it, climate related financing, $81 billion have been secured so far. Okay, that's a wonderful number. It's important to keep track because many times we see our global leaders make commitments with good intent, but what happens after making those commitments in terms of achieving those results, that's not tracked. Unless you measure and report, you don't know how you're performing, isn't it? So you need to track those. And that happened in this part of the world. And that gave a very big stimuli to sustainability in this part of the world. So I covered some of this earlier. Yeah. So you have the greenhouse gas protocol. You have scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions. We all talk about this. Okay. What is scope 1? What is scope 2? What is scope 3? Many times you may be wondering. And of course, as a business, I can tell you the most challenging for people is scope 3. Okay. And I'll explain why. Scope 1 is relatively easy. It's your own consumption of fuel. Okay. So if you purchase fuel, you use fuel in your business, you have to disclose the emissions relating thereto. Scope 2 is indirect. Okay. So the business, but the indirect impact. For instance, if you have electricity used for air conditioning in your building, that will come under scope 2. If you use fuel for your fleet, that will come under scope 1. But you have a number of suppliers, isn't it? You have a number of vendors. They give you goods and services. What are they contributing towards carbon emissions is scope 3. And that's very difficult, isn't it? Because you can invest in terms of your systems, your processes to get information, but vendors, if they are not on the same page, it's very difficult to get that information. During the panel, we will definitely track something relating to information and where are the challenges which the businesses have. S1 and S2, in a nutshell, issued in 2023, June, applicable from 1 January 2024. You can use them. But regulators need to mandate entities, and that has not happened in our part of the world. Sharda had a question earlier around different regulators in our part of the world and how are they joined up. I heard your answer. I just want to supplement something there. What UAE has done is back, I think in 2019 or so, they constituted a working group of different bodies. Ministry of Climate is included, Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Finance, Central Bank, Abu Dhabi Global Markets, who were there yesterday, DFSA, and the Stock Exchange and ESCA. They're all part of this body. What they're trying to do is, let's get together, let's discuss, as it was mentioned, what's good for our market, and let's come up with core principles. So as early as June 2024, we have some core principles announced by this working group comprising of key regulators. The key challenge is not all regulators are a part of it. We still have maybe a few who are outside this remit. So it'll be interesting to make sure that all stakeholders are together in this. But the good news is most of the regulators are on the same page. Having said that, we have some climate-related regulations already out there issued by ADGM. You have a first mover advantage here. If you do this, then it gives to the stakeholders information that I'm prepared. I have my regulations. If you want to come use my geography and raise money, the rules are here. So that first mover advantage is there, and I'm sure other parties will follow suit. So the challenge in terms of S1 and S2 is that people need to mandate it. And one of the difficulties is that in our part of the world, they're very quick when it comes to decision making. So companies here, my advice to them is to be prepared. Go, there's a standard out there. It's going to take time and effort in terms of gathering data, putting everything together. The sooner you do it, the better it is. I briefly covered the board structure. So as far as IASB and ISSB are concerned, they are independent, but they have the same monitoring board. And it's important to keep them separate because one is focused in terms of the financial reporting standards. The other one will be focused in terms of the sustainability standards. But there is linkage, because ultimately the financial statements, and the sustainability information should be, to a certain extent, there shouldn't be anything misleading. So again, we know what their role is to develop the standards to make sure that they obtain comments from people like us and ensure that the companies adopt something which will allow comparison, transparency, and we have good information disclosed around metrics, governance, risk management, etc. So in a nutshell, S1, it's a general framework standard. Okay. We talk about governance, strategy, risk management, as well as metrics. S2 is focused on climate related disclosures only, and what an entity's exposure is to climate, and then how does it deal with them. So I'm almost coming to the end of my presentation, and then I will introduce I'll ask the organizers to introduce the panel. So what should you be doing as an entity? As I said earlier, look at these standards which are already there in public domain. Understand as an entity, how are you affected? What's your contribution to ESG? Negative or positive? It doesn't matter. Maybe I'm an oil company and I'm polluting the environment and I have greenhouse emissions. Okay. I need to acknowledge that, and I need to say, what do I do about it? We saw the carbon capture example of ADNOC Gas presented earlier, spending over $13 billion. What are we aiming to do? We have emissions. One way of containing those emissions is to capture it and repurpose it. We have different types of injection in gas here, isn't it? We have the regular gas injection. UAE tried nitrogen injection, and now is looking at the injecting carbon for gas lift. So this is quite important. So if you repurpose it instead of emitting it, then our carbon footprint is diminished. Similarly, each entity must see, what is its contribution and what's the impact. Why am I doing it? Am I doing it for financing? Am I doing it because this is connected with my core values? Am I doing it because it is inevitable? If I don't do this, I will not exist in the future. So that would be my key takeaways for the audience in terms of thinking, how does ESG impact your own organization? And if we don't act, if we don't have a takeaway from the session saying, how do I implement it in my own organization, then, it doesn't serve the purpose. So please remember this. So with that, I request the organizers to introduce my panel.
Thanks, Mr. Acharya, for the nice presentation. I would like to say thank you very much. Because of his effort, ADGM participated and onboarded on our this session. So thank you, sir. Thank you very much. As you mentioned about that, the topic about Mahabharata. So we came from the land of Sanatan. Sanatan means perpetuity. A perpetuity can only happen if there is a sustainability. That's why we worship river Ganga, we worship animal, and the ESG, the part of the core of our cultural system. Sorry. So my next panelist, our next panelist is Mr. Vikas Prasad, President and CFO, Olam Agri Singapore. Vikas Prasad is the President and CFO of Olam Agri, a global agri-business headquartered in Singapore. He is a qualified cost and management accountant from India. He has 25 years of experience in the global environment and has led the group on a private placement in a landmark US $3.5 billion equity valuation transaction. Corporate restructuring and carve out of the group into separate operating groups involving 250 plus subsidiaries, IPO readiness for the potential dual listing and right issue, board and SDX reporting, strategic planning, finance, and digital transformation 2.0. He has received several personal recognition, including CFO of the year 2024 by the UBS Forum in Dubai, Commercial Leader of the Year 2023 by the Tiger Hall in Singapore, CFO of the Year Award 2016 by the CFO South Africa Forum, Observer Seat of the Professional Accountant in Business Advisory Group with International Federation of Accountant, IFSC. IFSC featured Olam Agri Finance as an example through publication of the case studies on role of finance in the diverse sustainability and the transition from the CFO to the CBO mindset. Speaker at the World Congress of Accountant 2022, IFSC, PAIBAG in New York 2023, GLO PSC 2023 by ICAI, Resolve 23 by ICAI in Singapore, National Cost and Management Accountant Convention 224 by ICMI. So, the warm welcome to Mr. Vikas Prasad. He is also associated with the International Public Forum of Bihar, and we are in the same group. So our next panelist is Ms. Anisa Ramkrishnan, Director Transworld. Ms. Anisa spearhead the corporate business analytics and the corporate social responsibility of the Transworld Group. Upon joining her family business Transworld, she has worked to restructure the group corporate responsibility purpose to function with the same outcome-driven, data-intensive approach being applied in the main business units. Anisa holds a master in shipping, trade and finance from the Cash Business School, London, a bachelor in the international affairs with the minors in business administration, and a global social entrepreneurship from the Northeastern University, Boston. She has completed a program in big data analytics from the Kellogg School of Management in Chicago. So please give her a big round of applause to her and a warm welcome to her on the stage. Our last but not least, the next panelist is CS Sarda Balaji, founder Novo Jurist Legal. Sarda Bala is the founder of the India and USA-based law firm Novo Jurist Legal, started in 2008. Focus on emerging companies in technology. Sarda has worked with the large MNC and Indian conglomerates as their in-house attorney on various projects, including IPOs, cross-border transaction, takeover, merger and amalgamation, intellectual property. For more than 12 years prior to starting Novo Juris, Sarda was an independent director of the Fay Valley Transport. Is pronunciation correct? Yeah. Listed on the NYSE Euronext Paris, the world leading manufacturer and supplier of railway products such as brake system, doors, couplers, and many others. Fay Valley is now acquired by WebTech. Sarda continue on the advisory board for many technology and the tech-enabled companies. She is an active angel investor in about 30 plus companies, on LP in 2 venture funds and investor in the accelerators such as Health Start. Sarda is a lawyer and the company secretary along with a degree from the Institute of Chartered Secretary UK. She has a diploma in intellectual property rights from the National Law School of India, Bangalore, and advanced certificate course in the copyright from the World Intellectual Property Organization. So warm welcome to CS Sarda Balaji. Thank you, sir. Floor is yours.
First of all, very warm welcome to my esteemed panelists. I think we have a wealth of ESG knowledge with our panel, and they've also come very well prepared, I believe, for today's session. So please, we have audience questions at the end. Feel free towards the end to ask any question which you have. I will start the conversation with opening remarks from our esteemed panelists on the topic. So at the outset, Sharda, perhaps from yourself.
Sure. Good morning. It feels like I'm back in my alma mater. Apart from being a company secretary, I'm a lawyer as well. But, when you build the ecosystem, I think ICSI is doing a tremendous job of doing the code or talking about awareness, doing sessions such as these. They're bringing all the stakeholders together. So thank you so much, ICSI, for bringing me here. I am going to talk about the financing part of the ESG. Just general financing, as well as we move along in the panel discussion, we are going to talk about the sovereign wealth funds as well and how the state can play a very large role when it comes to creating social impact goals, the strategy for the nation, etc. There was a very interesting question, and I'm going to answer that during my talk. So how do these funds get formed, right? So there are several people who pool the money and put it into an entity, which then invests into startups or targets, emerging enterprises, etc. And they grow, evolve, scale. They exit, maybe an IPO, they get acquired. That money then comes back into the pool, and then it gets distributed to its investors, right? Now, at the head of the waterfall is either a sovereign wealth fund, which then perhaps invests into the fund of funds, which then invests into a private equity or a venture fund, which then invests into a portfolio company, which scales and makes the money and brings it back, and therefore it goes to the investors. Yeah, with me. Now, the way the thesis that comes from these funds, right? Very largely in my part of the world, it is IFC, which invests big into the fund of funds. And they have a framework, they have a thesis. They say, when I invest in you, Mr. Fund, then I would want your fund to be doing XYZ, no child labor, no wastages, green, etc. So they bring out those theses. That then translates into either the fund and its portfolio. Now, every time a fund seeks money from its investors, they come up with something called a private placement memorandum, which kind of talks about what its investment thesis is, where are they going to invest, how long are they going to stay put. Now, if it is a private equity, it's large ticket size, larger duration, about 7 to 10 years, even though I say it's large duration. They call themselves patient capital, but about 10 years. And then they also talk about what is the kind of IRR, the investment rate of return, the return that they give to its investors, and so on and so forth. Then you also have venture funds, similar but smaller ticket sizes, quick and fast kind of investments. They largely focus on scalable investments, so therefore they can make the money quicker, faster, and therefore they can pay it back to their investors. And they then go and do their second fund, third fund, etc. Now, in this journey, when those metrics are being put together, right? So there is a PPM that goes to the investors. Now the investor, someone like an IFC would say, hey, this is the kind of companies that I would like to invest and grow as a strategy. Then that becomes the metrics that this fund would have of its portfolio. How do they do it? They would say, this is the kind of companies that I will invest in. This is the stage of the company that I'll invest in. This is the kind of ticket size that I will invest in. And this is the kind of reporting MIS metrics that I would want of each of these companies. When they do that, from the fund to the enterprise, they would sign up a shareholders agreement. All of you are familiar with it. It talks about multiple things. The first one would be governance. What would be my board constitution be? How would the voting happen? What is the quorum for the meeting? Then it talks about, how much would I invest further on the preemptive rights? How would I get should there be an anti-dilution, a dilutive issuance? What happens to my rights? It would also talk about, the liquidation preference. So the exit strategy that each company would give to the fund. And usually it is an IPO or an M&A or a strategic sale, etc. How would that happen? When would that happen? What happens if that kind of an exit does not happen, right? Can there be a tag along? Can there be a drag along? It also talks about transfer restrictions on the founders. In very early stage, they even have clauses of founder vesting, right? All of those are governance. Sustainability is a little tricky because On one hand, all of these are talking about wealth creation for its investors. And sustainability is long term. Now, how long term is long term? Now, a venture capital is quick, right? So they may look at a 5, 6 years. I mean, it also depends on the vintage of the fund. So if the fund is about 7 years and they're investing from the third years of its already pooled money, then they would have just about 4 years to return the money back to its investors. So the vintage of that fund also matters. And therefore, that typically you can look at 5 to 6 years for a venture fund. Now, many of these ESG related companies is long haul. It's very long haul, many a time. Now, it is also told that, eight channels like your cement, iron, etc., contribute to 60% of global warming. Now, wouldn't it be nice if it can come up with different alternative materials compared to a cement? Isn't there none at all? Of course there is. But do they get invested? Not so, because it takes a very long time, right? So there is one fund that I'm vision boarding right now on ESG for them. They have found alternative material of bamboo extract that can do a job equivalent to a cement. Now, to farm that bamboo, to do that processing, production, and tell all of these so-called cement users to start using this takes time. That is where sovereign wealth funds, which is long and patient, much more patient, about at least 30 years, right? They matter. When they come in and they invest, it's a long term because that is the vision boarding of the nation, not just the company now. So the tone is set right on top when we do these kind of metrics. Now, when we get into the portfolio management itself, right, where the fund said, hey, I'm investing in you because of this kind of product that you're building. And then that needs to be measured because, say, for example, if it is electricity consumption, then how is it making it more sustainable? How can electricity consumption be reduced using alternatives? Can there be an IoT play, etc.? When that happens, then that is the metrics that gets tied up and then goes and gets reported into the LPs also. So it all comes so beautifully when it comes to this kind of, when we vision board it for the funds. I mean, it's a beautiful exercise and it's very interesting when everything comes together like this.
Very interesting analysis. And I'm sure I have some follow-up questions a little bit later in the panel discussion. Sharda spoke about alternatives. This morning I had cappuccino and I learned that a cappuccino has 1 kilogram of carbon emission. And if instead of using milk, if I use oat milk, it would have been 1/3 of it. So it's about alternatives. So we can all make a difference in terms of those alternatives and choosing sustainable elements in terms of our lifestyles. Vikash, we'll start with your opening remarks.
Thanks, ICSI first for the invitation and also choosing the theme on sustainability. I think this is the most appropriate and the need of the hour. So I work with Olam Agri. We are into food and agriculture, and we are in a very peculiar situation as an industry. So if you look at food and agri, it's first a victim of climate change. So all the climate change that is happening, we are seeing either floods or heat waves, all these impact that we are seeing globally, agriculture first gets impacted. The flood will wipe out the crop completely. The yield of the various crops will reduce due to the heat waves. So on one hand, we see that the food and agri is the victim of the climate change. But on the other hand, if you look at it, the food and agri is also the culprit of the climate change, as almost 1/3 of the carbon emissions are caused by food and agri. Because of the land use change, because of uses of inputs like fertilizer, the harvesting practices, the planting practices, all that. So on one hand, it's responsible for increasing the greenhouse gas emission. On the other hand, it's also the victim. That's the first dimension I wanted to present. The second, if you look at it, the food system is lying between the people's health and the planet health. By 2050, the population is expected to reach 10 billion. It means we need more food. So we have to take care of people health and their nutrition. However, growing more food and more agriculture, clearing more lands will also cause more emissions. So it will also have the impact on the planet. So how the food system balances between the people's requirement and the planet's requirement is extremely critical. Now, while we are discussing all that, we also understand that the farmers are also getting impacted in this process. And if we look at 2030, we expect almost 840 million people, including the farmers, will be undernourished. The numbers will increase, mostly in Africa and Asia. While these inefficiencies are there, we have the food wastage. And as our esteemed speaker talked about it, that 20 to 40% of the food is getting wasted, mostly in the developed markets. So we want to grow more food, but at the same time, we have a higher wastage. As a second dimension I wanted to present. The third dimension I want to present is that the population increase of roughly 2 billion by 2050, most of the population increase is going to come from Africa. So 1.9 billion population increase will happen in Africa. Only 100 million population increase will happen in Asia. All the other regions will be neutral. And if you look at by end of this century, in fact, even Asia will become neutral. The entire population increase will happen only in Africa. So we have to look at Africa to feed the world. And also in terms of the arable lands, most of the arable lands are available either in the Latin America or now in Africa. So I come from an industry we feel that has a responsibility to drive sustainability and make the food systems and the supply chains more and more efficient. On the qualification side, if I look at it, we all are like professional accountants and secretaries. We feel that we are in the right position to drive sustainability and ESG because we like standards, we like disclosures, we like regulations. We like working with the team as a collaboration, and this initiative sustainability cannot be driven unless until we collaborate not just within the company, but also as an industry and along with the investors and regulators and the governments. So I think we are in a very good position to drive this agenda.
Thank you, Vikas. Anisha, you're a director in Transworld, and I believe you have an interesting story of your own entity. As a part of your opening remarks, if you could give us some insights as well.
Sure, thank you. Firstly, thank you for inviting me here. Happy to be on a panel that's so esteemed. We've had very interesting discussions together, so looking forward to our discussion in the future. So when you look at responsible investment for a sustainable future, so Transworld is a shipping company. So although shipping is one of the emitters, similar to what Bikash was saying in his business as well, we look at it from very sustainable environment. So for us, as a business, as a family, CSR has always been quite important in terms of what we do. And that's sort of been a tradition for years in the way we look at it. But in the recent past, we've also come across ESG and the importance of ESG and sustainability. So it's not something that sits alone, but it is something that's incorporated in the business itself. So the angle that I'd like to bring to this conversation is how do you incorporate it in a business, in an operations asset-heavy business? So if I can just quickly sort of run through in terms of how we look at it, right? So as was mentioned earlier, there are multiple different frameworks that you can look at. So whether it's SASB, whether it's GRI, so what we looked at is something that's holistic, but we also looked at something industry specific. So how do you combine the two so that you are making a difference? And then the second point that we went into was awareness. So when you talk about ESG, I think you naturally just come up with your focus being on E. But actually, a crucial important part of ESG is the S and the G framework. And that's actually where you get strong companies and where you build sustainable companies, right? So I think if you look at your governance framework, if you make sure that there's certain policies in place or certain ratios that you put in place, it has a more longevity sort of framework that you've created for it. So that's the second thing that we went into, building awareness around it. The third that what happened for us was materiality assessment in terms of seeing where we are and mapping the benchmark as to where we would like to go and how the holistic sort of journey would lead us to. So there were certain things that we look at as Transol when we look at ESG and how we like to incorporate it into what we do as a framework. So secondly, the other thing I do is I look at our family office. So I look at investments. So what I'd like to sort of emphasize and throw here is I think whether you're doing impact investment, whether you're doing sustainable investment, or whether you're just doing your investment that has nothing to do with the ESG framework, I feel there are always parts of ESG that you can incorporate into it. So, for example, similar to what Sharda was saying, I think when you look at your SHAs, when you look through, there's a lot of governance aspect that if you make sure that you're able to incorporate, whether it's the ratio of men to women, whether it's certain policies that are put in place, whether it's the social aspect of it, I think there's always an ESG sort of lens that you can put across your investment. So it's not just impact investment, but it's any type of investment. And I think as a user, you make conscious decisions, you make conscious choices. So it's not it's not unattainable or something that's sort of far-reaching in the future, but I think it's an everyday aspect that you can look at.
Thank you, Anisha. In this part of the world, we have a number of oil producers and this energy dependent economy. And from probably the last 10, 15 years, we've been seeing that trend around diversification, moving away from oil. And, if you look at just the energy sector and the CO2 emissions, it's more than 50% as a contributor to the global emissions. Now, in that context, because my question is that what are you seeing, particularly in the last 5 years around ESG in this part of the world?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand why all of us are talking about, the whole world is talking about ESG and sustainability. When we studied, most of us didn't study sustainability or ESG, but in the last decade or so, everyone is talking about ESG and sustainability. So we need to understand what has changed in the last couple of years. So if you look at the world, prior to 1950, when the industrialization started, if you go back almost like 800,000 to a million year, the carbon dioxide level in the atmosphere, which is measured in UAOM called parts per million. So the ppm oscillated between 200 and 300 over almost like a million year. Any change in this range happened over thousands of years, so that Mother Earth could naturally adopt it. Now, post-industrialization, which started in 1950, if you take that as a base, now the ppm level in atmosphere is 427. So the level which was static for over a million years, now between 200 to 300, post-industrialization, now is at 427. So it's extremely high, almost more than 50% increase in the atmosphere level, carbon dioxide atmosphere level. Then how do you understand that these levels and the carbon emissions? I will just give an example. If you assume, imagine that 2-story big building, assume like a spherical ball, that's 1 metric ton. And today we are emitting 54 billion such balls in the atmosphere every year. And that is going and getting stored in the atmosphere. So that's the damage that we are doing to to the world today. Second, if you look at the other stat in terms of the World Economic Forum data, they publish the global risk both in terms of the likelihood, the top risk in terms of the likelihood, as well as the impact. In 2012, out of the top 5 risks, only one risk was pertaining to environment on the greenhouse gas emission. Other 4 risks were related to economic, societal, technology, geopolitical, all that. Come 2020, 5 out of the top 5 risks were all related to environmental and climate. So that's how the transition has happened between 2012 and say 2020 now, whether it's a greenhouse gas emission or climate action or lack of climate action. All those are the key 5 global risks by World Economic Forum. Only in 2021, because of COVID came in, infectious disease appeared as one of the key risks out of the top 5. Now, anyone now in the new generation, if you look at it, anyone who is born in 2020 compared to people who are born in 1960, the new generation will see 3 times more climate adversities than what the generation of 1960s have seen, in terms of 7.5 times more increase in the heat waves, 2 times increase in the wildfires, 3.5 times increase in the floods. So overall, they will see 3 times more climate adversities than the generation of 1960. So that's the world we are going to live in. If you just look at our surroundings now, in the last 8 to 10 years, now the UAE rain, unprecedented rain, right? We have noticed that 9 out of the 10 biggest California wildfires have happened in the last 7 years. If you look at the floods that have happened in Bangladesh, then parts of India, Pakistan was a big flood 2 years ago, which wiped out almost 20% of the GDP of the country. So all these climate adversities has a huge impact on the economies, on the societies, on the well-being of the people, on the inflation, on the supply chain. It has a huge impact on all that. The Paris Agreement was the first, I will say, the great start when in COP21, the world leaders came together and they tried to curb the emissions or the climate change level at 1.5 degrees centigrade by end of 2050 and at the maximum 2 degrees centigrade. But the preference was that we curb it at 1.5 degrees centigrade. And when we say 1.5 degrees centigrade and 2 degrees centigrade, it is in comparison to 1950 when the industrialization started. Today, the world is warmer by 1.3 degrees centigrade already, and our target is 1.5 degrees centigrade. Now, all these governments are coming together. If you look at all the policies that the different governments have signed, that will take us to 2.9 degrees centigrade warmer world by end of this century, which is far ahead the 1.5 degrees centigrade that we are talking about. If you look at all the pledges that the governments have signed, it will also take us to a 2.4 degree warmer world. So we are nowhere compared to the Paris Agreement and where the world wants to be likely at a 1.5 degrees centigrade. You can think that what is the difference between 1.3 and 1.5 degrees centigrade? It's not a big thing. But I will give you some data point. At 1.5 degrees centigrade, almost 70% of the coral reefs will vanish, and that is absolutely essential for the ecosystems. The wheat crop, I'm just giving one example, wheat crop will reduce by 7%. Now this Russia-Ukraine crisis has started. It has an impact of 6 to 7% on the global trade flows. And then you can all see the impact on the inflation, the high commodity prices and all that. So here we are talking about at 1.5 degrees centigrade, the crops going down by 7%. If the world gets warmer by 2 degrees centigrade, 99% of the coral reefs will vanish, and then it will have a huge impact on the ecosystem, and the crop yield will reduce by 14 to 15%. So we are really in a crisis situation, and this crisis has led to a refocus on sustainability and ESG, which is nothing but bringing the economic vitality, planet health, and social equity together, not sure, but just not for this generation, but for generations to come.
Thank you, Vikas. Anisha, you spoke about TransWorld. Perhaps, there are a number of entities here who are looking to embark on their ESG journey. What would be your advice as someone who has done this before?
Sure, thank you. So in the ESG journey, I think a lot of it comes down to awareness and why you're sort of doing it. So for us, it was a little bit easier because I think the senior management was very pro ESG and understood the motive and understood what benefit it would be. But at the end of the day, I think if we're just sort of sitting in a silo and saying this is why it should be done, it's not going to work. So a big part of it was awareness from ground up and to make sure people in the operations were also aware of why we're doing it. So for us, when we looked at it, we combined SASB and we combined GRI, and that's primarily because it combines industry specific as well as global standards. And then the next thing we did, as I mentioned earlier, was the materiality assessment, in which you place yourself versus where you should be and your sort of roadmap against it. So a few things that we've done is we have a sustainability report in which year one was sort of our benchmark year. And in that, you gather a lot of data. So whether it's your operations data, whether it's your governance data, whether it's your HR data, making sure you're building and collaborating and creating a database. For example, small things like we were doing certain amount of training, but maybe we were not monitoring in a certain way. So creating those frameworks and creating that benchmark. Now we're in year 3, year 4, where we can sort of analyze the growth and what we've done, as well as create different frameworks to get there. Along with that, I think being in UAE, it's also really helped, and it's really pushed our ecosystem, because we are part of different ecosystems here, whether it's the Dubai Chamber of Commerce, in which they're very proactive in creating different ESG networks, as well as within shipping, there is the International Maritime IMO, which gives us certain standards and regulations. So that sort of helped us and assist us create a framework.
Thank you. Sharda, earlier you spoke about sovereign wealth funds. My specific question is that these metrics, etc., how do you apply them to a sovereign wealth fund? And if you could give any particular examples from this part of the world. As you're aware, we have in the UAE itself, ADIA, Mubadala, and ADQ. Of course, we have ICD in Dubai. So between them, you're speaking of anywhere over $1 trillion, $1.5 trillion of assets managed. So what influence could they hold, and what sort of metrics are we looking at?
Oh, you should see the leadership board. Of the top 5, it is the Norwegian Bank, China. Then it is UAE. Look at the top 10. It is maybe 6, 7 of them are UAE. So you folks from this part of the world can really shake the world. So SWF, if I can build, they're the primary investors, right? The largest, big checks. They're the primary investors, largely state-funded. So there are 3 main archetypes: wealth manager, strategic investor, capacity builder. Now, the capacity builder, they develop the national economy, they acquire strategic capability. So the top 5 SWF is coming, 2 of the 5, more than 700 billion each, is from Kuwait Investment Authority, and about 700 billion is Abu Dhabi, billion with a B. The strategic investor, so there they come up with points like, I sit on the consulting body of Niti Aayog. Niti Aayog is the think tank for Government of India. And the kind of conversations that happen are incredible. Out of those conversations came India's semiconductor policy, and it also came up with the space tech policy. And both of them are like private-public collaborations. Now, in a SWF, when it's behaving as a capacity builder, that's the role that they play. And that is how your Kuwait Investment and ADQ are working on. When they are in the capacity, the strategic investor, they focus on building strategic sectors. And Investment Corporation of Dubai, Mubadala, Kuwait Investment Authority, and Qatar Investment Authority. So I have a specific experience with Qatar Investment Authority because they believe in inclusive insurance. And while we tend to believe that these investors come with an extremely large check, they cut a very small check because they wanted to get into India and play on the inclusive insurance. And then you have the general wealth managers, where they primarily focus on financial returns, like your Abu Dhabi Investment Authority. So they generally do for wealth creation. So these are the three. Now, from those parameters, their thesis, their beliefs, their vision, comes your parameters of how they measure. And going back to my earlier example, when they invest into the fund of funds, in India, I have SIDBI, which plays a very large role as fund of funds. So then they, for the fund of funds investing, will again be, articulating or re-emphasizing those metrics again.
Thank you, Sharda. Next question is around the public-private partnerships. And how can we implement it in ESG, Anisha?
Sure. So in public-private partnerships in ESG, similar to what I said earlier, I think being here in UAE, I think we're placed in a quite good place because there's so much since COP28 and before that as well that UAE is actually actively doing as a government. So in Dubai, for example, the Dubai Chamber of Commerce, they're very active in the ESG initiatives. They have the ESG awards that they give out, and they're actively going after a lot of corporates to make sure that they're involved, to make sure that they're able to do their scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, understand how that's placed. As well as earlier, we were mentioning UACA. So for example, Transworld have signed up with UACA. And I think even through that, we've created a network where they themselves have come into our ecosystem and helped us understand what more we can do, what other companies are doing that are similar. But besides that, UAE also has a goal of being net zero by 2050. And Transworld has sort of piggybacked off of that and said that we will also be net zero by 2050, and we are working on a plan towards that. So I think it's a very good ecosystem that they've built here, very collaborative as well. And yeah, there's a lot more to come from it.
Because we spoke earlier about COP28, so what are the takeaways for you from COP28 and to your organization?
So compared to previous COPs, I think this was the historic COP that we have seen here in Dubai, UAE. Three callouts for me, which differentiate this COP compared to the three COPs. And those are the three bold decisions that was taken this time. The first is the global stock take. So they mandated all the companies to update on all the commitment that they had made as part of the NDCs, nationally determined contributions, making them accountable, and then going for a stock take. I think that was a great start. The second was about the loss and damage fund. This was the first time that this LSD was created especially for those emerging markets, the poor countries, which are getting also impacted by the climate adversities, while they are not the ones who have created this issue. So the creation of the loss and damage fund, I think, was a great, again, move. And third, I will say, is about the focus on renewables and that taking a very stiff target by 2030 that they want to increase the renewables by 3 times and energy efficiency or intensity improving by twice. I think these are the three, while there are many other good decisions and changes, but I think these are the three top important actions from my point of view.
Thank you for a quick summary. Anisha, any further takeaways from your side?
Yeah, so from COP28, there was a lot of collaboration that came through. And I think a big thing is the green funding, right? So a lot of the green funding that has started and pushed through from UAE, especially around UAE, towards, for example, the African ecosystem or the Indian ecosystem or something around. So that conversation that's happened has really been triggered by COP28.
Excellent. Any ecosystem without the role of professionals is incomplete because you briefly covered this in your initial remarks. But if you could give us some more insights in terms of the role of the CFO and particularly company secretaries around what role they could play on sustainability and ESG.
So the entire sustainability and ESG is a new area, right? So there are no, I will say, established role. It also depends upon who takes the lead. And the person who takes the lead might have the first mover advantage. Today, in many organizations, you see that the engineers are taking the lead. In some of the organizations, you will see that the operational team is getting more into sustainability. In some of the organizations, you are taking also the finance is taking the lead, internal audit is taking the lead. So it's about who takes the lead. So generally, if you look at the role today, what we can play, it starts first as a steward. So today with the multiple regulations and the framework, first understanding those framework and what is that my company is responsible for and what we have to disclose. So understanding of those framework, understanding of those regulations in the respective jurisdictions, and then ensuring that we first comply. So first we start with the compliance. So whether it is a TCFD framework or now which has become the IFRS S2, so we comply versus that. On other parameters, whether it's a SASB or GRI, you choose what suits the best for your organization or what is the requirement from the regulators, you comply. So you can play a critical role in that. The second is about, Amisha talked about scope 1, 2, and 3, that how do we measure for my organization, how do I measure my total emission into 1, 2, and 3, and then split that at the BU level, at the country level, at the profit center level. So I need a digital tool to do that. And there are many tools today in the market. So how can we as a governance professional take a lead in terms of working with tools, setting it up for an organization so that at least I have the carbon measurement and the carbon accounting I can do. Then once we have done that, we can partner within the company in terms of the driving the entire decarbonization plan, coming up with our net zero target, going to science-based target initiatives, committing ourselves to SBTi, preparing the year-wise goals. And once those goals are prepared, then committing some OPEX and CAPEX. Then while committing those CAPEX, how do I do the due diligence so that the investment that I'm going to make is all ESG compliant? So we can play a role on DD. Usually any investment that we have been doing, we look at tax, finance, legal, technical, but now we have to incorporate ESG aspect also in all the investment that we are going to do. Then how do we influence the behavior of our internal stakeholders, the business stakeholders? And there are various tools today also to look at how do we influence the behaviors of the business stakeholders. Then we are getting into sustainable financing. How can I commit to certain KPIs which I will impact as part of my sustainability or ESG role, working with the lenders, the banks, and agreeing on sustainability-linked loans or the bonds, which can also be cheaper, and it can create transparency and reputation for the company. And we have seen that a company which has a much better ESG policies and compliances, their performances are much higher compared to those who are not performing. It also have a direct impact on the valuation of the company. So you will see that the market price of the shares or the overall valuation of the company goes up if you are more compliant on it. So there are various areas where governance professionals can take a lead and they can drive the ESG and sustainability journey.
Anisha, you are a director in Transworld. As governance, you have an important role in value creation. And question is, how can you contribute towards ESG from a governance perspective?
Sure. So as was mentioned earlier, so I think if you have an ESG framework in your company, you're most likely than not to sort of outlive your competition and have a sort of long-term game plan, right? So I think if you look at ESG, it's not just the environment, but it is the S and the G, which is core to your business. So if you have a strong governance in place, then you do have something that is, running like a smooth sort of system. So let me just give you a small example of things that we've done. So we have created internally for internal stakeholders what we require as ESG. But our next step is also external stakeholders. So it's not enough to just say, okay, we are doing this, but who are we also working with? So, for example, we have a vendor questionnaire. So whether it's our organization here in the UAE or in India or globally, we make sure that any vendor we're working with follows a questionnaire, is compliant with ESG within their company as well. And if not, then we have sessions where we're educating them in terms of how do you measure your scopes, why is ESG important, why you should have an ESG policy in place. So I think it's one, in terms of doing it yourself, but two, also making sure that you're a catalyst for change makers as well.
Thank you, Anisha. Sharda, when it comes to implementing ESG manifesto, there are several challenges. You need buy-in from a number of stakeholders in the organization. So what role can our members play here, and what role can our institute play here?
Oh, the company secretaries are right on top of the waterfall. You are extremely well positioned to be on the top of the waterfall. Work with the board of directors. You can work on the visioning of what the strategy could be, what the policies should be. How do you get those metrics from across the department? You should see Tata Steel's BRSR report. How many of you have actually worked on a BRSR? Awesome. Tata Steel's BRSR is a work of art. I'll just take one line item of it, okay? It talks about people. If you say diversity, then do you have a policy? Then what does diversity mean? What is the metrics? What is the attrition? How many women? How many other, LBQGT? It talks of that. You talk of permanent employees, contract labor. What is the attrition there? Why is there so much of an attrition, etc.? It's such KPI-driven reporting. Unlike other frameworks, typically it is a narrative. Well, we have this policy, we ensure, our vision is to be inclusive, etc., etc. But BRSR is KPI driven, and it goes to a very large detail. And in the company secretary's course gives you that very strong canvas. They also give you a bunch of colors. You create the painting, right? As a professional, you create that painting. You can actually sit on the top, create an agenda matter for every board meeting to talk about ESG. You can create this guidance and policy training and awareness. You should actually be driving that awareness week that we have on multiple of these, include ESG, and therefore you play a very large role in driving this mandate across the organization.
Thank you. Thank you. Because a quick question on regulatory challenges in this part of the world with respect to ESG, your input, please.
I think as esteemed speaker earlier also alluded to that, first, there is no standardization of these regulations and the framework. The companies are choosing the framework which suits them. So the benchmarking of the performances, the comparability, that is not available. So then we have to see that I think IFRS S1 and S2 is a good start in that direction. We would like to see more such standardization and a uniform framework where we can disclose the information in a very uniform manner, and the performances can be compared with our peer companies and other companies. So first is about the standardization. Second challenge I say is about the evolving regulations. So today we have about 2,300 plus climate-related regulations across the globe. Now, which one to pick and choose and implement? So only few governments have now made it mandatory, and they have told us about the framework. Like say, in Europe, we see some of the mandatory frameworks. In US, we see some mandatory framework. Singapore has implemented it last year. They have asked us to follow TCFD, but on the ESG reporting, the entire sustainability reporting, they have not prescribed us. They say that as per your recommended options, you can pick and choose. So I think the UAE is also, I think, is going through the phase, but my personal belief is that the UAE can show to the rest of the world how it should be adhered to, how it should be reported to. I think it's just a matter of time before UA will come up with those frameworks and regulations.
Thank you. I spoke to a telecom entity the other day, and they told me that they have 400 data points when it comes to their sustainability reports. So data availability, data quality, data consistency is something which is very, very important. We have a lot of practical challenges. So Anisha, question to you. You've done this before. Could you tell us some insights from your own experience around data? And then if you're using any tools for sustainability reporting, that will also be quite interesting for our audience.
Sure. Let me tell you, the hardest part of ESG is convincing the people who are working with data why it's important to actually have the data in place and give you the data. So it is definitely key. I think you can say ESG, it's good for the environment, good for the ecosystem, but I mean, practically speaking, if you don't have the data and you don't have a baseline, you don't really have you can't have data points in place to show your growth and show your trajectory. So, for example, as a shipping company, we have a lot of points where we can gather data, whether it's in our scope 1, scope 2, or scope 3, and analyze it. So whether it's, for example, the air quality, or whether it's the fuel that we're using, or the type of fuel, and these sort of things. But to convince a captain on a ship of why it's important and to make sure that they're able to have the data is more challenging than you would think. But that being said, we also make sure that we have a third-party accreditation in our sustainability report so that all the data is verified, and we want to make sure that we are living up to a certain standard. But yes, that is definitely an issue, and that's something that is an ongoing process.
And absolutely, I think quality, consistency is quite important. Otherwise, the output is not comparable. Coming to a very interesting subject, which is also introduced by our previous speaker around AI and data. How do we use technology, particularly AI and analytics, in terms of ESG?
Like they say, data is the new oil. Data plays a crucial role, and how you manage becomes very crucial. So in an automotive industry, 5,500 parts, maybe it comes from 3,000 vendors. Now, if you were to see S3 of those 3,000 vendors, how do you get all of that information in terms of what is it that they are doing as ESG? Therefore, you can report out, right? That is all your, you have ERPs, etc. But now the new way that people are developing. In fact, I have invested into this company called Snowcap, which does AI for ESG reporting. And they use this in multiple ways. So based on what the company or the industry is, they do the competitor analysis on the flick of a finger. And they bring out those metrics very beautifully into the report, which also talks about, okay, you have done XYZ, but your competitor is way better. And AI there helps in creating those kind of metrics.
Excellent. Because just on internal carbon pricing, I know you have some wonderful ideas. Could you share some insights to the audience from your side?
Yeah. So first of all, why internal carbon pricing is needed? Today, if you look at two organizations using the same capital, or within the organization, so two different businesses using the same capital, generating the same returns, how do you differentiate between the two businesses? One is, say, emitting more carbon and another is emitting less carbon, or they are neutral, or they are generating positive carbon. But the financial returns are the same. We need to differentiate that. Now, to differentiate that, there are different methodology. You can look, today we look at profit after tax and the return parameters. Can we start incorporating, say, the climate cost before we evaluate the performances? So can it be climate adjusted profit after tax? So once we start to do that, so this is a tool to influence the behavior of internal stakeholders. Now, there are various methods. So if you go to different advisors, they will talk about different methodology. One with the top three which are popular in the world today is first is the shadow price method, where the companies uses the carbon cost in line with the transition, the jurisdiction transition to a low carbon emission and the expected cost that the government can charge. So that's the first method. And that ranges between an average of, say, $28 to a maximum of $500 per metric ton of carbon emission. The second method is about the implicit cost method, where you look at that for 1 metric ton of carbon reduction, what investment needs to be done and how it will convert into a commercials and the P&L impact. So you charge basis that. And third is the standard, just the fee method. You charge a fee to the different businesses, create a fund. Those funds can be used for sustainable investment. So there are different methodology for internal carbon pricing, which is being used by different organizations. But you can also come up with your own captive proprietary methodology. What feels that most suitable for impacting the behaviors of your business stakeholders.
Thank you, Vikas. Investor education is something which is very, very important as far as ESG is concerned. And I'm sure that conferences of this nature go in a long way in terms of promoting the subject itself. What else can be done, Sharda, in terms of investor education, which is, by the way, my final question for the panel. And if you have some time, we'll ask 1 or 2 questions. We'll take 1 or 2 questions from the audience.
Sure. ICSI yesterday released a stewardship code meant for the institutional investors. What better, right? We have had some instances, even in India, it was there in the media, on governance lapses in many startups, etc. But guess what happens? Whenever there is a lapse of governance, the first thing that happens is the director representing the investor resigns. Now, what happens? The crying baby is with the founders, but who gave those metrics or who gave those mandates? It was the investor, but he runs away. Now, wouldn't it be nice if there is some kind of code for all of these investors? And for example, we spoke about a right of first refusal in the shareholders agreement. We spoke about transfer restrictions for the founders. But guess what? The investor can invest in a competing company, competing business. They sit in the board of both of these companies, getting the best information available. And they say, no, by the way, we changed, there's a firewall. And one director sitting in this company is not sitting on the board of that company. But there are 4 people in your fund, right? And they talk on lunch. So this kind of conduct, wouldn't it be nice if there is a code for them too? And that ICSI is playing a great role there. And I really like the fact that they released the code yesterday. I think that's the number one thing that we need to do when it comes to this. And in terms of ESG itself, different people, different strokes, right? But SWF, when they can percolate that pieces amongst its funds, which then goes on to the portfolio, you have a winning formula there.
Excellent, excellent. I've received the pink slip as well. So we come to a conclusion of this particular panel. Maybe we can take 1 question from the audience.
Yeah, so see, great discussion. But somehow I found this very paradoxical, this ESG, because at one time, for us as a society, this is not only the onus on the corporate, is also on the society. This is honors that how we can take care of our society, because we live in that. So I'll give you one example, like I have 1 car, my wife also wants car, my son also wants car. So in a house, there is 3 cars. So this creating the carbon footprint on the ecosystem, entire ecosystem. I say, okay, reduce only 1 car. Then the car maker company say, oh my God, my car is not selling. The salesman is getting fired because you are not selling the car in the market. That's the example. So how to balance this? Like we talk about AI and the blockchain, and the sir mentioned great about the blockchain and AI. At the same time, Blockchain is, yeah. So carbon paper is not being used. Everything is getting digital. At the same time, blockchain and crypto, we know that how much data mining take the energy and electricity. So at one hand, we are saying, oh, from here we are making the differences. But at the same time, do you have some study that is blockchain and AI creating the stress on the electricity, and how we are so the reduction of carbon here on this part and generation of carbon is this part? Is there a study to show that yeah, we are really getting benefited from that part? So it is not like he said about the agriculture. At the same time, and animal slaughter from the farmhouse would come to our table from the animal slaughter. It's contributing around 18%, 18% of total carbon footprints. So how to balance all this paradoxical? That's my question.
A great question. And if I understood it well, it's about human behavior, human psychology. You know, we want more. So instead of one car, we have three cars, and that's not contributing. So I would go back to what our panelists initially mentioned. It's about choices which we make. So those choices are individual choices. If we don't have any takeaway from today's session to say, yes, this is what my organization will do, this is what we as an entity will do, but then what would we do as individuals? What personal choices do we have? We have a lot of choices. We are at the end of the day the consumers, isn't it? So if we make that commitment, if we make those right choices, we will leave a better world tomorrow for our children. Thank you very much, everyone.
What will happen to the company who is making the cars, refrigerators? So that's the CFO and the sales.
Absolutely. So sustainability, when we speak about, there's a concept called sustainable production as well. So we produce what is going to be consumed, and we have to, this has to impact consumer behavior, producer behavior. Unless together as an ecosystem, we don't function in the right way, this is not going to work. So we need everyone's support. A round of applause to our panelists, please, who have contributed for today's panel discussion. Thank you very much for hearing us. And hopefully we have finished on time, 3 minutes over, but we've done that. Thank you very much.
I would now request Mr. Vijay Ojaji to come on the stage and felicitate the panelists today. Mr. Bikash Sad. Ms. Anisha Ramakrishnan. Ms. Sharda Balaji. Mr. Padmanabh Acharya.